There's a heaviness that doesn't come from conflict or distance, but from caring more than you're prepared to admit. It shows up quietly, often at night, when the world slows down enough for honesty to surface. Your soulmate is hurting right now, not because something went wrong, but because what they feel for you runs deeper than they expected, and depth has a way of exposing old wounds. This pain didn't arrive suddenly. It grew in layers. At first, caring felt safe. Familiar. Almost comforting. It felt like something they could manage, something that stayed within the boundaries they'd built for themselves over time. They told themselves it was controlled, reasonable, contained. But feelings don't stay contained when they're real. They expand. They press against the walls you've built. They ask questions you weren't planning to answer. And that's where the ache began. They started noticing how often your presence lingered in their thoughts, even when they tried to focus elsewhere. Not in an obsessive way, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, undeniable one. You became part of how they measured moments. Part of how they processed silence. Part of how they understood what mattered. That kind of caring isn't light. It brings warmth, but it also brings vulnerability. And vulnerability has a way of stirring memories that were never fully healed. Old disappointments. Times when caring deeply led to loss instead of connection. Moments where openness was met with absence. They remember those moments clearly. So when their feelings for you deepened, something inside them tightened. Not because you did anything wrong, but because caring this much reopened doors they'd carefully closed. Doors that led to fear, not because of the present, but because of the past. They didn't want that fear to touch you. That's an important part of this. The hurt they're carrying isn't about blame or resentment. It's about protection. They're trying to protect you from the parts of themselves that still ache. They're trying to protect the connection from being shaped by unresolved pain. That effort costs energy. You might sense it as hesitation. As emotional restraint. As moments where they pull back just enough to keep themselves steady. Those moments aren't indifference. They're self-regulation. They care too much to be careless. Caring deeply has changed how they see themselves. It's challenged the version of them that believed staying detached was safer. That version kept them functional, but not fulfilled. Now, fulfillment is within reach, and that's terrifying in its own way. Fulfillment brings risk. Risk means acknowledging that something matters enough to lose. And that's the part that hurts. The awareness that if something were to go wrong, it would hurt deeply, not superficially. They're feeling that potential pain before anything has even happened. That anticipation isn't weakness. It's sensitivity. It's the mark of someone who understands the weight of emotional investment. They're not naive about it. They're careful because they know what's at stake. What's at stake is real. They've noticed how much more present they feel around you. How conversations linger in their mind. How small interactions carry meaning beyond their surface. That awareness is beautiful, but it's also destabilizing if you're used to emotional neutrality. Neutrality was a shield. Now that shield feels thinner. They're grappling with the realization that caring this much means letting go of certain defenses. It means being seen, not just admired. Known, not just appreciated. And being known means being vulnerable. Vulnerability doesn't come easily to them. They're hurting because they're standing at the edge of something meaningful and feeling the pull to step forward while simultaneously feeling the instinct to protect themselves. That tension creates ache. It creates confusion. It creates moments of emotional fatigue. You may feel that fatigue reflected in how they show up. Not consistently distant, not consistently open. Somewhere in between. That in-between space is uncomfortable, but it's honest. Honesty isn't always smooth. They're learning that caring deeply isn't something you can have to. You can't measure it precisely. You can't control how much it affects you. It seeps into places you didn't anticipate. That seepage is what's causing the hurt. They're also aware that you might not fully see this internal struggle. They've been careful not to make it your burden. They don't want their fear to become your responsibility. They don't want their past to cast a shadow over something that feels sincere. That restraint is another form of care. Caring this much has made them more reflective than usual. They're revisiting old patterns, old beliefs about love and attachment. Questioning whether the walls they built are still serving them or just keeping them isolated. Isolation feels heavier now. It used to feel safe. Predictable. Now it feels empty. That emptiness isn't about lacking people. It's about lacking depth. And depth is what they feel with you, whether they say it out loud or not. Depth asks something of you. It asks you to show up with less armor. It asks you to tolerate uncertainty. It asks you to risk being affected. They're affected. That's why it hurts. They're not hurting because they regret caring. They're hurting because caring has made them aware of how much they've been holding back in other areas of their life. How much they've been surviving instead of fully living. You didn't cause that realization. You triggered it simply by being present in a way that felt real. Realness is disarming. They're also aware that their pain doesn't need to be resolved immediately. It's not a crisis. It's a growing pain. The kind that comes when something inside you is expanding beyond its previous limits. Expansion can feel uncomfortable before it feels freeing. They're in that uncomfortable phase now. You might notice that they're more thoughtful than usual. More careful with words. More attuned to emotional nuance. That's not distance. That's awareness sharpening. Awareness can be heavy when it's new. They're learning to sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. That's progress, even if it doesn't look dramatic. It means they're allowing themselves to feel fully rather than numbing or deflecting. Feeling fully includes pain. But it also includes connection. They care too much because the connection feels meaningful. Because it doesn't feel interchangeable or casual. Because it feels specific. Specific connections challenge generic defenses. They're also recognizing that caring deeply doesn't obligate immediate action. It doesn't require rushing or declarations. It requires honesty with oneself first. That honesty is happening now. They're acknowledging that their hurt is tied to fear, not to you. Fear of loss. Fear of repetition. Fear of opening something they once had to close for survival. Survival isn't the same as living. They want to live now, but they're learning how. That learning process includes discomfort, includes moments of doubt, includes emotional soreness that comes from stretching beyond familiar limits. That soreness doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is changing. Your soulmate is hurting because they care too much, yes. But they're also growing because of that care. They're becoming more honest, more present, more aware of what they want and what they're afraid of. Those realizations take time to integrate. You don't need to fix this. You don't need to carry their pain. You don't need to interpret it as a sign of instability or withdrawal. It's a sign of depth meeting vulnerability. Depth doesn't always feel comfortable at first. If anything, this moment is about patience. Allowing space for feelings to settle. Letting understanding develop without pressure. Trusting that caring deeply, even when it hurts, is still a sign of something real. They're not pulling away because they don't care. They're steadying themselves because they do. And that distinction matters more than it might seem right now. This stage of the story isn't about resolution. It's about recognition. Recognizing that caring deeply changes people. It brings old fears to the surface. It asks for growth that can feel uncomfortable before it feels natural. They're walking through that discomfort now. Quietly. Honestly. Without trying to make it your burden. That's not distance. That's care, learning how to exist without fear running the show. And that kind of care, once it finds its footing, tends to become something solid, not fragile. This is the beginning of that process. It doesn't start with a breakdown or a dramatic moment. It starts with a quiet exhaustion that doesn't have a clear cause. The kind of tiredness that comes from holding something inside for too long without giving it a place to rest. Your soulmate is feeling that weight now, not because they regret caring, but because caring this deeply has asked them to confront parts of themselves they once kept buried. They didn't expect this. At first, what they felt for you seemed manageable. It fit neatly into the emotional boundaries they had learned to live with. They believed they could keep things steady, balanced, untouched by the parts of their past that still carried scars. But feelings don't always respect the boundaries we set for them. When they're real, they grow roots. They weave themselves into your daily awareness. They change how silence feels. That's when the hurt began to surface. Not sharp pain. Not heartbreak. More like a constant pressure that made it harder to ignore what was happening inside. They started noticing how often their mind returned to you, even when they tried to stay present elsewhere. How your presence, even when you weren't physically there, altered the emotional tone of their day. That kind of presence is powerful. Powerful enough to shake old defenses. They've spent years convincing themselves that emotional distance was a form of strength. That staying guarded meant staying safe. Those beliefs weren't formed randomly. They were built through experience. Through moments when caring deeply led to disappointment. Through times when vulnerability was met with absence or misunderstanding. Those memories didn't disappear just because something new felt different. So when their feelings for you deepened, something inside them reacted. Not with rejection, but with caution. A quiet voice reminding them of what it once cost to care without restraint. That voice isn't loud, but it's persistent. It says, "Be careful. That caution is part of why they're hurting now. They're caught between what they feel and what they fear. Between the desire to lean in and the instinct to protect themselves. That tension doesn't resolve easily. It creates emotional strain. They're not pulling away because you've done something wrong. They're adjusting because they care enough to be careful. Careful with themselves. Careful with you. They're aware that their internal struggle might not be visible on the surface. They've learned how to function through discomfort. How to smile, engage, respond appropriately while carrying something heavier underneath. That skill helped them survive earlier chapters of their life. Now it's being challenged. Because carrying this much doesn't fit neatly into survival mode. It asks for presence, not just endurance. It asks for honesty, not just composure. Honesty feels risky when you've been hurt before. They've been revisiting old emotional patterns, sometimes without meaning to. Moments from the past resurface, not because they want to dwell there, but because their current feelings are touching similar emotional territory. The mind does that. It looks for reference points. For proof of what might happen next. Those reference points aren't predictions. They're memories. And memories can distort the present if they're not recognized for what they are. Your soulmate is in the process of recognizing that. They're starting to see that their hurt isn't coming from you. It's coming from unresolved fear tied to past experiences. That realization doesn't erase the fear instantly, but it gives it context. Context softens fear. They're also noticing how much they want to protect what exists between you. Not control it. Protect it. Protection, in this case, means not letting old wounds dictate new behavior. That's harder than it sounds. Old wounds don't announce themselves. They show up as hesitation. As overthinking. As emotional fatigue that doesn't seem proportional to the situation. That fatigue is what they're feeling now. They care deeply, and that care has made them more aware of what's at stake emotionally. Stakes create pressure. Pressure creates discomfort. Discomfort creates growth, if it's allowed to exist without avoidance. They're allowing it, even though it hurts. You might notice moments where they seem quieter than usual. More reflective. Less reactive. Those moments aren't distance. They're processing. They're sitting with feelings instead of pushing them aside. That's new for them. In the past, pushing aside felt safer. It kept things predictable. Predictability felt like control. Control felt like peace. But that peace was fragile. It required constant effort to maintain. What they're learning now is that real peace doesn't come from control. It comes from alignment. Alignment between what you feel and how you live. Caring this much has disrupted their alignment temporarily. Not because the feeling is wrong, but because their life hasn't yet adjusted to accommodate it. Adjustments take time. They're also aware of the responsibility that comes with caring deeply. Responsibility not in the sense of obligation, but in the sense of awareness. When you care deeply, your choices matter more. Your presence matters more. Your absence matters more. That awareness can feel heavy. They don't want to mishandle something meaningful. They don't want to repeat old patterns unconsciously. That fear of repetition adds to the hurt. It's not fear of you. It's fear of themselves falling back into old habits. They're questioning whether they're capable of staying open without losing themselves. Whether they can allow closeness without sacrificing stability. Those questions don't have immediate answers. And that's okay. They're learning that not every emotional question needs to be resolved right away. Some need to be lived with until clarity emerges naturally. You may sense this as a kind of emotional holding pattern. Not stuck. Not moving forward aggressively. Just steadying. That steadiness is intentional. They're grounding themselves so that whatever comes next isn't driven by fear. Fear-driven actions leave residue. They don't want residue. They want whatever unfolds to feel clean. Honest. Considered. Caring deeply has also made them more aware of how much they value emotional safety now. Not just physical presence, but emotional reliability. They're learning what they need in order to feel secure enough to stay open. That learning process includes discomfort. Discomfort isn't failure. It's adjustment. They're adjusting to the idea that caring deeply doesn't have to end in loss. That vulnerability doesn't automatically lead to harm. Those beliefs take time to rewrite. Rewriting beliefs is exhausting. That exhaustion is part of what they're carrying. They're not asking you to fix it. They're not expecting reassurance. They're not projecting their fear onto you. They're doing the internal work quietly, responsibly. That's why it might feel like they're holding back at times. They are, but not out of lack of care. Out of respect for the process they're in. Respect for the connection. Respect for themselves. They're also noticing something encouraging beneath the hurt. Despite the fear, despite the discomfort, they haven't pulled away completely. They haven't shut down. They haven't dismissed what they feel as inconvenient. That tells them something important. It tells them this matters. Matters enough to be worked through instead of avoided. Matters enough to feel uncomfortable for. Matters enough to risk growth. Growth doesn't feel graceful while it's happening. It feels awkward. Tender. Uncertain. That's where they are now. You don't need to interpret their hurt as a warning sign. It's a sign of depth meeting self-awareness. Of someone realizing that they care more than they're used to, and learning how to hold that care without letting fear define it. This phase isn't about pulling away. It's about recalibrating. Recalibrating how much space to give fear. Recalibrating how much trust to extend. Recalibrating how to care without losing balance. They're doing that work now. Quietly. Thoughtfully. Imperfectly. And while it hurts, it's also opening a door they once believed had to stay closed forever. That door leads to a version of connection that isn't based on avoidance or overprotection, but on honesty and presence. They're not there yet. But they're closer than they've ever been. And that closeness, even when it hurts, is still a sign of something real taking shape rather than falling apart. This isn't the pain of regret. It's the ache of growth. And growth, when allowed to complete itself, tends to create something stronger than what existed before. It begins to show in ways that are easy to misunderstand if you're only looking at the surface. Not as distance, not as coldness, but as a careful slowing down. Your soulmate isn't stepping back because the feelings faded. They're slowing because the feelings deepened enough to require attention. Caring this much has shifted something fundamental inside them, and they're trying to learn how to stand in that shift without losing balance. They didn't expect caring to feel this heavy. Not heavy in a negative sense, but weighted. Like something valuable placed gently in their hands, something they're suddenly responsible for holding with care. That responsibility isn't about you doing anything wrong. It's about them realizing that what they feel has consequences, emotionally and internally. Consequences bring awareness. And awareness, when it's new, can feel overwhelming. They've started noticing how their inner dialogue has changed. Thoughts don't pass as quickly as they used to. Certain feelings linger longer. Decisions feel more considered. Even silence feels different now. It's no longer empty. It's filled with reflection. Reflection can be tiring. Especially for someone who spent a long time surviving by staying emotionally efficient. In the past, efficiency meant not dwelling, not overthinking, not letting feelings grow roots. That approach worked when connections were shallow or temporary. This connection isn't. That's why old strategies feel insufficient now. They're realizing that caring deeply requires a different emotional skill set. One that includes patience, vulnerability, and the ability to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it. Those skills aren't learned overnight. They're learning them now. Slowly. Unevenly. Honestly. You might notice moments where they seem introspective, almost withdrawn, even while still present. That's not them pulling away from you. That's them turning inward to understand what's happening before they act on it. They don't want to react blindly. Reacting blindly led to pain before. There were times in their past when emotions moved faster than understanding, when attachment formed before trust had time to build, when vulnerability was offered to people who didn't know how to hold it. Those experiences taught them caution. Caution isn't the enemy of love. Fear is. Right now, caution and fear are tangled together, and they're working to separate them. Fear says, this could hurt. Caution says, move thoughtfully. They're trying to listen to the second voice without letting the first one dominate. That process hurts because it asks them to feel fear without obeying it. To acknowledge vulnerability without retreating. To stay present even when the instinct is to protect. Protection used to mean distance. Distance feels wrong now. They're also becoming aware of how much they care about how their actions affect you. That awareness didn't exist to this degree before. It's new. And it's heavy because it means their emotional choices don't only belong to them anymore. That kind of consideration is exhausting at first. They replay conversations in their mind, not to analyze you, but to understand themselves. They wonder if they said too much or too little. If silence felt supportive or confusing. If presence felt steady or distant. These questions don't come from insecurity about you. They come from a desire to be responsible with something meaningful. They don't want to unintentionally cause pain. They don't want to repeat patterns where emotional intensity overshadowed emotional care. That awareness is shaping how they move now. Shaping doesn't mean suppressing. They're not suppressing their feelings. They're containing them until they understand how to express them in a way that aligns with who they are now, not who they were before. That distinction matters. In the past, expression often came before understanding. Now understanding is being prioritized. That can look like hesitation from the outside. Inside, it looks like effort. Effort to grow rather than react. Effort to choose intention over impulse. Effort to let feelings mature instead of rushing them. Maturity doesn't feel exciting in the way intensity does. It feels steady. Grounded. Sometimes even uncomfortable. But it lasts. They're also noticing how caring deeply has softened parts of them they didn't realize had hardened. Moments of empathy come more easily. Patience extends further. They're more attuned to emotional nuance, both in themselves and in others. That softness makes old armor feel heavy. Armor that once protected now restricts. Removing armor doesn't happen all at once. It happens piece by piece. Each piece removed exposes sensitivity. Sensitivity can hurt when it first meets air. That's part of what they're feeling now. You might sense this as emotional tenderness. As moments where they seem affected more easily than before. That's not fragility. It's openness adjusting to exposure. Openness takes time to stabilize. They're learning that caring deeply doesn't mean losing yourself. It means redefining where your edges are. Edges don't disappear. They shift. That shift is uncomfortable. They're also confronting the realization that caring this much means they can no longer pretend that outcomes don't matter. Before, it was easier to say, whatever happens happens. Now, outcomes carry emotional weight. Weight creates caution. Caution creates pause. Pause creates space for growth. Growth is what's happening, even if it doesn't feel graceful. They've started recognizing moments when fear tries to masquerade as logic. Thoughts like, maybe it's better not to feel this much. Maybe staying neutral is safer. Maybe depth complicates things unnecessarily. Those thoughts are familiar. They used to listen to them without question. Now, they're questioning them. Questioning doesn't eliminate fear immediately, but it weakens its authority. It turns fear from a command into a suggestion. Suggestions can be evaluated. They're evaluating now. They're asking themselves whether avoiding pain has actually led to peace in the past, or whether it simply led to emotional numbness. They're questioning whether staying detached truly kept them safe, or just kept them lonely. Those questions hurt. But they're necessary. Caring deeply has forced these questions to the surface. Not because something is wrong, but because something meaningful is asking for honesty. Honesty doesn't feel safe at first. It feels exposed. Exposure doesn't mean danger. It means visibility. They're visible to themselves in ways they haven't been before. That visibility includes acknowledging that they want something real. Something that requires presence, not just tolerance. Something that asks for emotional participation, not just availability. That realization is both exciting and frightening. Exciting because it points toward fulfillment. Frightening because fulfillment comes with risk. They're holding both feelings at once. That balancing act is tiring. You don't need to interpret their tiredness as doubt about you. It's doubt about their own readiness to hold something this meaningful without reverting to old patterns. They're learning how to do that. They're also learning that caring deeply doesn't obligate them to rush. It doesn't require immediate decisions or declarations. It requires honesty with themselves first. That honesty is ongoing. You might feel moments where things feel steady, followed by moments where they feel uncertain again. That fluctuation is part of integration. Feelings don't stabilize in a straight line. Stability comes through repetition. Each time they choose presence over avoidance, trust grows a little. Each time they sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, confidence builds. Confidence doesn't arrive suddenly. It accumulates. They're accumulating it now. They're also becoming aware that your presence has become a mirror. Not in a critical way, but in a revealing one. Being around you highlights parts of themselves they haven't had to look at in a long time. That's not your responsibility. It's simply the effect of genuine connection. Genuine connection challenges stagnation. They're being challenged now, and that challenge hurts because growth stretches areas that have been dormant. Dormant muscles ache when they're used again. That ache doesn't mean damage. It means reactivation. They're reactivating emotional capacities they once shut down to survive. That reactivation is sensitive. They're treating it carefully. You might notice that they're more deliberate now. Less impulsive. More reflective. That's not them losing interest. It's them learning how to care deeply without letting fear steer the wheel. Fear still speaks. But it doesn't decide anymore. That's progress. They're also aware that caring deeply means accepting that they might get hurt again. That awareness hasn't gone away. What's changing is their relationship to it. Instead of letting that possibility dictate their actions, they're allowing it to exist without dominating their choices. That's strength. Not the loud kind. The quiet, resilient kind. They're hurting because they care too much, yes. But they're also growing into someone who can hold that care without collapsing under it. That growth is happening now. Slowly. Imperfectly. Honestly. You don't need to do anything differently. You don't need to reassure or retreat. The most supportive thing right now is patience. Allowing space for this internal recalibration to complete itself. This phase isn't about distance or doubt. It's about integration. Integration of past pain with present possibility. Integration of fear with desire. Integration of caring deeply with staying grounded. That integration takes time. They're giving it that time. And while it hurts, it's not the pain of something ending. It's the ache of something learning how to exist fully for the first time. That kind of ache doesn't break connections. It reshapes them into something stronger, steadier, and more honest than before. It starts as a quiet awareness that nothing is the same anymore, even though nothing obvious has changed. The world looks familiar, conversations sound normal, routines stay intact, yet something underneath has shifted its weight. Your soulmate feels that shift constantly now. Not as panic, not as excitement, but as a steady internal pressure that reminds them they can't go back to who they were before caring this deeply. This awareness doesn't ask for attention. It simply stays. What hurts most right now isn't fear of loss. It's the realization that indifference is no longer an option. Before, emotional distance was something that could be chosen when things felt overwhelming. Now, distance feels unnatural, almost dishonest. Trying to detach creates more discomfort than staying present ever did. That realization is unsettling. The heart doesn't like halfway spaces. It notices when something matters and refuses to pretend otherwise. This is the space your soulmate is standing in now, where caring deeply has removed the illusion of neutrality. There's also a growing understanding that caring this much changes responsibility. Not responsibility to act immediately, but responsibility to be emotionally truthful. Pretending nothing is happening feels heavier than acknowledging what is. Acknowledgement has consequences. It means feelings can no longer be hidden behind busyness or logic. It means moments of silence are no longer empty, they're filled with awareness. Even small interactions carry weight now. Not pressure, but significance. Significance is tiring at first. Your soulmate didn't expect how much emotional energy it would take simply to remain honest with themselves. Honesty sounds simple, but when it challenges old survival habits, it becomes work. Internal work. Quiet work. The kind no one applauds but everyone feels. They've noticed how often the mind tries to minimize the situation. Thoughts like, maybe this is temporary, maybe it's not that deep, maybe caring less would be easier. Those thoughts come automatically, not because they're true, but because they're familiar. Familiar doesn't mean right. Old coping strategies are loud right now because they sense they're losing control. Emotional detachment used to be reliable. It kept expectations low and disappointment manageable. Now that detachment feels like self-betrayal. That conflict hurts. There are moments when your soulmate feels emotionally exposed without having said or done anything different. That exposure isn't about vulnerability with you, it's vulnerability with themselves. Seeing clearly how much you matter removes the option of emotional shortcuts. Shortcuts always existed for a reason. They were built during times when caring deeply led to pain that wasn't handled well by others. Those memories haven't disappeared. They're resurfacing now, not to sabotage the present, but to ask for resolution. Unresolved pain doesn't like to stay quiet. It whispers warnings. It tightens the chest. It urges caution even when the present doesn't resemble the past. Sorting out which signals belong to now and which belong to then is exhausting. That exhaustion is part of the hurt. Your soulmate is learning that emotional maturity isn't about suppressing fear or ignoring pain. It's about holding fear gently without letting it dictate every choice. That's a skill still being developed. Skills take repetition. There are days when it feels easier. Days when caring feels natural, even comforting. And then there are days when the weight returns, reminding them how unfamiliar this depth still feels. The fluctuation doesn't mean regression. It means integration is still in progress. Integration isn't linear. The heart revisits lessons multiple times before they stick. Each revisit brings slightly more clarity, slightly less fear. Progress happens in increments so small they're easy to miss. What remains consistent is the awareness that walking away emotionally would hurt more than staying present. That awareness anchors everything else. It's the reason avoidance no longer feels like relief. Relief now comes from honesty. Honesty doesn't always bring comfort immediately. Sometimes it brings discomfort first. But it also brings alignment, and alignment reduces internal conflict over time. Your soulmate is beginning to experience that reduction, even if it's subtle. Less internal arguing. Less justification. More acceptance of what is. Acceptance doesn't mean surrendering control completely. It means choosing reality over illusion. Illusions used to provide safety. Now they feel hollow. There's also a new sensitivity emerging. Emotions feel closer to the surface, not in a volatile way, but in an accessible one. It's easier to feel empathy, tenderness, and concern. That sensitivity can feel overwhelming when it's new. Sensitivity doesn't weaken character. It deepens it. Still, depth requires balance. Too much openness without grounding can lead to emotional overload. Your soulmate is learning how to ground themselves while staying open, a balance that wasn't required when emotions were kept at a distance. That learning curve is steep. It's also reshaping how they view connection in general. Casual interactions feel less satisfying. Shallow exchanges feel draining. There's a craving for authenticity now, for conversations that don't skim the surface. That craving makes existing emotional noise harder to tolerate. They're noticing how certain distractions no longer work. Keeping busy doesn't quiet the feelings the way it used to. Neither does logic. Neither does rationalizing. The heart insists on being acknowledged. Acknowledgement doesn't demand immediate action. It demands presence. Presence is what your soulmate is practicing now. Staying emotionally present without rushing to define outcomes. Letting feelings exist without trying to force them into decisions. That practice hurts because it requires patience. Patience is uncomfortable when emotions are strong. The urge to resolve, clarify, or protect can be intense. Learning to pause instead of react feels unnatural at first. But pausing prevents damage. Your soulmate understands that reacting from fear would risk harming something meaningful. That understanding keeps them steady even when the internal discomfort rises. There's also an increasing awareness of how much your emotional world matters to them. Not in a possessive way, but in a considerate one. They think about how actions land, how words might be interpreted, how silence might feel. That consideration adds emotional load. Before, concern was simpler. Now it's layered with care, respect, and responsibility. Those layers don't crush them, but they do require adjustment. Adjustment always involves discomfort. You might sense moments of emotional hesitation, pauses that feel deliberate. Those pauses aren't walls. They're boundaries being redefined in real time. Boundaries don't disappear when someone cares deeply. They evolve. Your soulmate is redefining what healthy boundaries look like when depth is involved. Boundaries that don't shut you out, but also don't abandon self-protection. That balance hasn't fully settled yet. There are moments of doubt, not about the connection, but about their own capacity to navigate it well. Self-doubt can masquerade as emotional distance if you don't know what you're seeing. What's really happening is calibration. Calibration requires fine-tuning. It requires mistakes, corrections, and patience. None of that is visible from the outside. Inside, it's loud. Despite the noise, one thing remains clear: caring deeply feels more truthful than not caring at all. Even with the hurt. Even with the fear. Even with the discomfort. Truth has weight, but it also has integrity. Integrity is what's guiding your soulmate now. Not impulse. Not avoidance. Integrity says, stay honest, even when it's uncomfortable. That commitment is what's keeping this process from turning into withdrawal. They're hurting because they care too much, yes. But they're also staying because that care feels worth learning how to hold. Learning how to hold something precious always starts with uncertainty. Uncertainty doesn't mean instability. It means growth hasn't finished yet. This stage isn't about decisions. It's about emotional alignment catching up to emotional truth. That takes time. Your soulmate is allowing that time. Not perfectly. Not effortlessly. But sincerely. And sincerity, even when it hurts, builds something real beneath the discomfort. Something that doesn't rely on illusion or emotional shortcuts. This pain isn't pushing them away from you. It's pushing them toward a deeper understanding of themselves, which is the only place lasting connection can come from. That understanding is still forming. And until it does, patience and presence are doing more than action ever could. It settles in as a quieter kind of knowing, not sharp or urgent, but steady enough that it can't be ignored anymore. There's an inner acknowledgement now that whatever is happening isn't temporary confusion or a passing emotional spike. It's something that has taken root, and roots change the ground even when nothing on the surface looks different. That awareness has been heavy lately. Not heavy in the sense of dread, but heavy with responsibility. Caring this deeply means every internal choice carries more weight than before. Ignoring feelings no longer works. Distracting oneself doesn't bring relief. Even logic, once a reliable refuge, feels incomplete without emotional honesty beside it. That's uncomfortable. There are moments when your soulmate catches themselves longing for the simplicity of how things felt before caring this much. Back when emotions were easier to compartmentalize, back when attachment felt optional rather than inevitable. That longing isn't regret. It's nostalgia for emotional safety, even if that safety came at the cost of depth. Depth doesn't come without friction. What's creating the ache now is the tension between who they were trained to be emotionally and who they're becoming through this connection. One version prioritizes control and predictability. The other is learning to tolerate uncertainty and vulnerability. Those versions don't merge easily. The space between them hurts. There's also a growing sensitivity to how easily words, or the absence of them, can affect you. That awareness has heightened self-monitoring. Not in a performative way, but in a conscientious one. Before speaking, there's pause. Before acting, there's reflection. Reflection slows everything down. Slowness can feel frustrating when emotions want movement. But rushing feels more dangerous than waiting now. That instinct to slow down isn't avoidance. It's protection of something that feels fragile precisely because it matters. Fragile doesn't mean weak. It means alive. Living things need care, not force. That understanding is shaping behavior in subtle ways. There's less impulsive reassurance, less emotional oversharing meant to relieve discomfort quickly. Instead, there's a preference for steadiness, even when steadiness feels unsatisfying in the moment. Unsatisfying doesn't mean wrong. There are days when the emotional weight feels manageable, almost calm. On those days, caring feels like a quiet warmth rather than a burden. And then there are days when old fears surface unexpectedly, triggered by something small and seemingly unrelated. A tone. A pause. A memory. Those triggers don't indicate a problem in the present. They reveal unresolved layers from the past that caring deeply has brought to the surface. Caring acts like a spotlight. It illuminates not just the connection, but everything within reach of it. That illumination can be overwhelming. Your soulmate is learning that growth doesn't just happen by adding new experiences. It also happens by revisiting old ones with new awareness. Experiences once endured without understanding now demand to be reprocessed honestly. Reprocessing takes energy. Energy that isn't always available in abundance. That's part of why there's fatigue now. Not physical exhaustion, but emotional tiredness from doing work that was avoided for a long time. Avoidance once felt like strength. Now it feels like delay. There's also an emerging realization that caring this deeply has changed priorities. Things that once seemed important feel less compelling. Shallow distractions don't hold attention. Emotional noise feels louder than before, harder to tune out. That shift can feel isolating. Isolation doesn't come from being alone. It comes from outgrowing certain emotional environments before finding new ones that fit. Your soulmate is in that in-between space now. In-between spaces are uncomfortable. They lack clarity. They lack labels. They don't offer reassurance. But they're also where transformation happens. Where old structures dissolve and new ones haven't fully formed yet. That's where the hurt lives. Not in doubt about the connection, but in the uncertainty of becoming someone new because of it. Becoming someone new means letting parts of the old self go. Parts that were familiar. Parts that felt safe. Parts that kept emotions predictable. Letting go hurts even when what replaces it is better. There's also a growing awareness that emotional independence doesn't mean emotional isolation. That lesson is challenging long-held beliefs. Independence was once defined by not needing anyone, by staying self-contained. Now independence is being redefined. It's starting to look more like self-trust than self-protection. Like the ability to feel deeply without losing stability. Like allowing closeness without surrendering identity. That redefinition takes time to integrate. During that integration, discomfort shows up as overthinking, as hesitation, as emotional pauses that feel awkward even to the person experiencing them. Those pauses aren't gaps. They're recalibrations. Recalibration is necessary when systems change. The emotional system is changing now. There's also an awareness that caring deeply makes loss imaginable in a way it wasn't before. Imagined loss hurts even when nothing has been lost. That imagined pain can create preemptive grief. Preemptive grief is exhausting. It's the pain of something that hasn't happened but feels possible enough to matter. That pain doesn't mean pessimism. It means emotional investment has crossed a threshold. Thresholds aren't crossed lightly. Crossing them changes how risk is perceived. Before, risk felt manageable because attachment was shallow. Now risk feels heavier because attachment is meaningful. Meaningful things create stakes. Stakes demand care. That care is what your soulmate is trying to practice now, even when it hurts. Practicing care without suffocation. Practicing presence without pressure. Practicing honesty without forcing outcomes. Forcing outcomes would feel easier in some ways. Decisions create certainty. Certainty quiets anxiety temporarily. But certainty built on fear doesn't last. Fear-driven certainty collapses later. That's why there's resistance to rushing now. Even when emotions want clarity, restraint feels wiser. Wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with confidence. It often feels like hesitation, like doubt, like patience that hasn't yet been rewarded. But wisdom holds. There's also a deeper understanding forming about emotional responsibility. Responsibility not to control how you feel, but to manage how those feelings influence behavior. Caring deeply doesn't excuse inconsistency or withdrawal. It asks for awareness and intention. That responsibility adds pressure. Pressure can feel like pain when you're not used to carrying it. But pressure also strengthens capacity over time. Capacity is being built now. You might sense this as moments of emotional maturity that feel new, even surprising. A steadiness that wasn't there before. A willingness to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. Those moments are signs of growth. Growth doesn't eliminate pain immediately. It reframes it. The pain now isn't about longing or absence. It's about expansion. About making room internally for a level of care that once felt unsafe. Unsafe because it wasn't handled well in the past. Handled differently now. Your soulmate is learning to trust that the present doesn't have to repeat the past, even if the feelings feel similar. Similar doesn't mean identical. Awareness changes outcomes. There's also a subtle shift in how hope is held. Less fantasy. Less projection. More realism. Hope now looks like curiosity rather than expectation. Curiosity doesn't disappoint the way expectation does.